What is up, everybody? It's me, Josh, and today I'm bringing you guys a little bit of a discussion, and I'm also very interested to hear your opinion on it, which is the topic of hand traps in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously, this was sparked by the Fiendsmith Tira deck that I ended up bringing to YCS Bologna that I made top 32 with. It was one of the most common responses under my deck profiles, like, oh my god, the amount of hand traps in these decks, you know, like, what has Yu-Gi-Oh! Become, all that kind of stuff. So this was something that I discussed with my stream chat recently as well. We were talking about the deck that I brought, why I brought it, why I played so many hand traps, and what exactly I think of the situation that the game is in right now. So I really hope you enjoy this discussion, and once again, make sure to let me know in the comments down below what you think. If you want to join these discussions live in the future, the link to the Twitch stream is also in the description down below. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy the video, and thank you for watching. Before we talk about what exactly happened at YCS Bologna, I want to give a shout out to Team Raid and Trade, which is the team that I have joined prior to this YCS, which obviously played a major factor in us all playing the deck together at the tournament. It's been a pleasure to work with these guys for YCS Bologna. I think we did find a very good deck for the event. We were also able to perform quite well with the deck overall. I think we had 8 people from the team entering the tournament with it. Over half of us made day 2, 4 of us that made top 64. I don't want to go over all the card choices and explanations. Again, I've made a deck profile. The other people from the team have also made deck profiles. You can just watch it and understand it that way. Obviously, the list that you played and that you won with is also a similar idea. Even though it only side decks the Tira cards, the concept is very similar, which I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm pretty happy about this because, like I said, 4 of us made top 64 of the tournament, but no one got further than top 32, which was a little bit of a bummer to us because we really thought the deck was better than that. We really thought the deck could go all the way. Seeing someone who had a similar idea and actually managed to take it all the way is great to see. So once again, congratulations. Oh yeah, Pack, I just didn't count him because he's not in Raid and Trade, but yes, Pack also made top 8. So like, even though I wasn't able to win with it or the team wasn't able to win with it, it feels good to see that the concept was good. You know, it always feels good to know that what we were onto was a good idea and was probably the right call. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do whenever you're entering a tournament, is you're trying to make the right calls. Whether you can actually win with it is a different question, right? You can make the perfect call and still not win because that's how Yu-Gi-Oh! Works. Sometimes you need a little bit of luck with matchups and how you draw, and sometimes dice rolls. Like, that's all part of it a little bit. At the end of the day, all that matters is that you've tried your best and that you actually ended up bringing a winning concept to the tournament that could have theoretically won if it was your day. And so seeing this made me actually happy because I think this is a confirmation that the concept that we thought of was actually a winning concept. What are the areas where you'd say the deck fell short? I don't think I would change anything looking back, if I'm honest. For this specific tournament, I don't know if there is anything that I would say the deck didn't provide. The thing you have to realize, this deck was a meta call. Like, this deck inherently is not insanely powerful or anything like that, right? Like, this deck plays a very simplified game of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like, it almost feels like a modern version of something like Zodiac or something, like a super low to the ground deck that tries to do very efficient stuff with one card, but like nothing too crazy. The one card combos that this deck can do are not even close to what like Snake Eye tries to achieve with Snake Eye Ash, or what Yubel tries to achieve with Samsara D Lotus. The power of this deck's one card combos are not even the same power level as like Centurion one card combos, right? Just to put it into perspective, this is like not what it's about. It was more like a meta call in the sense that we needed something that had a functioning game plan into the existing hand traps that people play. The reason why I wanted to bring this up and talk about it a little bit is because not the most common response, but definitely a popular response under my deck profile for this deck and also other deck profiles for this deck has been the sentiment that, oh my god, what has Yu-Gi-Oh! Become that people are playing 23 hand traps in a 42 card deck? Like, over 50% of your deck is hand traps. I can't believe what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has become. That sort of stuff, right? To an extent, I think it's a valid thing to say. About this deck, I don't feel this way because from my perspective, playing this deck is actually fun. The concept of this deck is to just have better control over these decks in the format that try to like explode and make a board that you literally cannot beat anymore, like Snake Eyes and Yubel. You're trying to stop those decks from doing those super unfair things, and you're actually trying to force them into a grind game. which just so happens to be something that I personally enjoy. I enjoy the games that happen after you interrupt Snake Eye once or twice, or maybe even 3 times, and they still end up with like some sort of half board or charmer line or something like that, and you actually have to play a game of Yu-Gi-Oh against them. If anything, this deck is more of a symptom than the actual problem, is the way I look at it, because the only reason why we're playing 23 hand traps is because that's the only way we can force Snake Eye to grind with us. The same is true for Yubel. I rather wanted to play grind games than trying to like combo harder than my opponent. I think it's very fitting that the last European YCS of the year sparked this creation, right? Because 2024 really has been a year of those explosive one-card combos really dominating the game, right? Like I think we can all agree that 2024 has definitely been, in terms of one-card combos, the most powerful year in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, where those kind of decks have been defining the format, right? Whether they were the best pick for a certain event, put that aside, but they've definitely been dominating, right? And it's been all about like, if these cards resolve, it's incredibly hard to keep up with it. And this deck was basically our answer to this entire thing. We're trying to play a real game that is not defined by a singular card resolving and then winning the game from there. And this was the only way we found to do it. The way Snake Eyes and Yubel are designed, it is just not possible to like throw one hand trap at them. Often not even 2 is enough. And this is ultimately why we also went over 20. There was a point where our deck was 50% hand traps exactly. It was 20 hand traps in 40 cards. The theory behind changing the ratios, the theory behind going up in hand traps was that we needed more than 2 when we went second to feel comfortable. You would open a hand of Ash Veiler and it was like, well, sometimes it's enough and often it's not. I guess we can also take a quick look at the overall deck breakdown for YCS Bologna as well, because this has all turned into like a kind of overarching like format talk. Like, how is the current format? Is it a good format? Is it not a good format? And all that kind of thing. I personally think the current format is fine. It also has very distinct weaknesses. One thing that is positive about it is that decks like Snake Eye, Yubel, and Tenpai have all been kind of balanced in a way where none of those decks is clearly the best deck anymore and nothing is dominating over others. That's a good thing, but at the same time, I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. And I've always said this whenever we've talked about things like this. I think evaluating a format should go deeper than just looking at the deck diversity, at like, oh, how many decks are viable? How many different decks make top cut? How many different decks make it into the top 8? How many different decks were able to win tournaments in this format? If you didn't know what these decks did in this pie chart, you would maybe think like, hey, this seems like a pretty healthy format because there's a bunch of different decks competing with each other and you have a bunch of different options, which at the surface is true. I had a bunch of different matchups throughout my run at the YCS. I played against Snake Eyes, I played against Fire Kings, I played against Fiendsmith decks, I played against Yubel, I played against Tenpai, I played against Ritual Beast, I played against Centurion, I played against Memento. 8 or 9 different decks for my opponents throughout 12 rounds of Swiss and 2 rounds of Top Cut. I think the most I've seen a deck was like 3 times. Diversity is here. I still feel like that my issue with Snake Eye and Yubel does not go away only because they have counterplay. I personally am, on the one hand, very happy that an innovation like this deck was possible for this YCS. The whole process of finding this deck, building this deck, working on this deck, perfecting this deck, bringing it to the tournament, and then seeing it perform was a very, very fun experience to me. This was a format that was solvable, which I personally think is very fun and very challenging and very cool. On the other hand, I am not super thrilled by the fact that the solution that we found had to involve over 50% hand traps, because the reality that we faced in testing and in preparation was that every time our opponent's Snake Eye combo resolved, we were not winning the game. Every time our opponent's Yubel combo resolved, we were not winning the game. Even when you go first and your opponent's Tenpai combo resolves, you are not winning the game. This format that, even though it had a solution, it felt very, very explosive and dangerous is the only word I can really find for it. We are in a format where if at any point you let your opponent play even a couple of steps, they will probably spiral out of control because of how much card advantage these cards produce. What kind of board one Samsara de Lotus makes, what kind of board one Snake Eye Ash makes, even Tenpai, like how much damage one Chandra does. We are in a time in Yu-Gi-Oh where like this is the solution because this is the deck that can say no to your opponent opponent the most consistently. You have to force your opponent into playing an actual game of Yu-Gi-Oh with this deck. That's why I think this deck overall is cool. And this deck is also cool. The one that won, by the way. I'm treating these two as basically the same because I think they're a very similar concept. You can argue about individual choices, but the idea behind these two is the same. These decks are more like a symptom than the actual problem. The problem is not the hand traps. The problem is that Snake Eye, Yubel, and Tenpai force you to play this way. Because if you don't play this way, then you will probably not be able to win going second. The problem is Fiendsmith. The problem is also not Fiendsmith. Now that Lacrima is banned, Fiendsmith is one of the healthiest engines in the game and honestly creates the most fun game states out of all the engines in Top Cut probably. Without Lacrima and Beatrice now, a super low to the ground engine that has a major focus on grind game instead of making crazy boards. If you compare what one Fiendsmith makes to what one Snake Eye Ash makes, or one Samsara de Lotus, or one Chandra, I think reaching the conclusion that Fiendsmith is the problem is something that I cannot get behind it. I personally don't experience it that way. I don't feel that way. And I think if you really think about it, you will also reach the conclusion that that is not the case. One Lacrima can bait up to 3 hand traps technically. Well, yeah, but I'm gonna tell you one thing right now, hypothetically speaking, all right? If this deck was super popular now and everyone was playing it, this deck is so easy to beat, you will not believe it. This deck is good into hand traps. So what? You don't need to hand trap this deck. This deck is a meta call because everyone is playing hand traps to stop Snake Eyes. If this was the best deck, no one would be playing hand traps because you don't need to do anything. If you just let this deck play, it summons like Fenrir Caesar or Fenrir Desiree. You can break that with any deck in the format. If you force them to negate the Desiree, one Talons beats the entire deck. This deck is a symptom of Snake Eye and Yubel. That is my answer on the hand trap thing, which is basically, yes, the fact that this deck plays 23 hand traps, I understand why people think that is cringe. I just want to point out that I don't think this is because like this deck is cringe. This is because the decks in the format are forcing us to do this. Frantically, we were looking for a solution that would obviously give us the best chances to win, and it just turns out that the best chances to win in the current format is to not let Snake Eye combo. That is the only way we found to consistently beat Snake Eye, is to not let them play. And I think that says way more about Snake Eye and Yubel and Tenpai than it says about this deck. We didn't try to do anything that made crazy boards or was able to easily OTK or end the game super quickly. This is basically a control deck. We're trying to stop the other decks from going completely crazy so that we can play a slower, more grindy game with them that our deck is good at, because we cannot compete with a Snake Eye combo or we cannot compete with a Yubel combo. It is simply not possible. We were trying Memento with some board breakers. We were trying Snake Eye and Fire King, obviously. We tried Yubel and all that kind of stuff. We simply were not satisfied with the solution of, if I go second, I try to resolve Fuvalos, and if I don't, then I have no chance against Yubel. I posted my updates about the tournament on Twitter, as I always do. I checked back. I won 3 or 4 dice rolls in Swiss out of 12, and I went 10-1-1. If I played Snake Eyes or if I played Yubel, I would have not topped this tournament. This was the meta call that was necessary to make it possible to top with those sort of situations, right? This is the kind of variance you try to eliminate when you're preparing for a tournament. You're trying to make it possible to top if you win like less than half of your dice rolls. This was the beauty of this deck, is that it didn't even matter that much. I would personally be interested in seeing how the people feel about this sort of thing. To me, the reaction makes sense. The fact that we have to play 23 hand traps to keep this format in check is crazy. I think it says way more about the other decks in the format than the deck that we played. This is another thing that I also want to emphasize on, is I think this is the thing I want most from whenever we get the next ban list. I think they should be reminded that only because the current format is balanced in terms of the numbers does not mean the current format is balanced in terms of the actual decks and the fun they provide for the format and all that kind of stuff. Because Snake Eyes does not really provide much to the format other than, hey, your deck has to play 15 hand traps minimum, ideally more, otherwise Snake Eye is going to smoke you every other round. And the same is true for Yubel. This is the next question that people have been asking. How would this deck work moving forward? I think right now, as long as people still play Snake Eye and such, like the deck is still good. How this deck exactly interacts after crossover breakers is something that I don't know. I'm not sure how this deck interacts with Ryziel. I have the gut feeling that it won't interact super well with it, because the Ryziel deck seems to be very resilient against hand traps. So like playing 23 does not seem to be that great. To everyone who doubts that this deck is fun, why don't you just go and play it? I think it's a super fun deck because it forces you to think outside the box. There's 2 steps. First, you hand trap your opponent and then you actually play Yu-Gi-Oh! You would be surprised how fun Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be when you stop them from doing the full Snake Eye combo. And you are like, okay, you know what? I know you are trying to perform a 10-minute cutscene on me, but how about I stop that? And we actually play Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's what the idea of the deck is. And it's very good at that. And that's what makes it enjoyable. Trade and Trade invents skippable cutscenes. How do you actually play the grind without any ways to draw more hand traps? It's because after you've stopped them, your deck is very good at creating interruptions, even if they hand trap you back. That's why the Cash Tiras and the Fiendsmith cards were the perfect match for this, is because you don't need to draw more hand traps. At that point, you try to convert your Cash Tira cards and your Fiendsmith cards into more ways to interact with your opponent. After you've used like your Veiler and your Impermanence, like going second, once you've had a turn, Fenrir represents an interruption. The Fiendsmith cards will get you interruptions. And even if they imperm your Fenrir on your turn because they don't want you to get the search and to remove something off their board, if you pass the turn back to them, the Fenrir is again a disruption. Even if they interrupt your Lacrima or Engraver, they can still set up an interruption via Fiendsmith in Paradise, right? That's why you end up trading favorably with their hand traps while they do not. Like if you Veiler a Diabell Star, if you Ash a Wanted, if you Imperm a Snake Eye Ash, if you Ghost Ogre a Deception, all those kind of cards, you use them one time, if they get stopped, they're gone. They don't provide any sort of long-term value / interruptions, whereas your cards do that. And that's why you end up ahead. That's why this deck wins. People think that this deck hand traps you to death and then OTKs you. I mean, this is not Tenpai, all right? Like, yes, the deck can do that, but only if your opponent literally has 0 interruptions. Like, not even one Imperm or not even one Effect Veiler. Yes, you can. That is every Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck now, pretty much. All right, I think we've talked about it enough. I think I have made my opinion clear on the current format. I think I've also explained why we thought this deck was a good call and why I still think it was a very good call, and why I think this deck is not as cringe as some people think, but it's rather just a response to the cringeness of Snake Eye and Yubel, and to an extent Tenpai, which I think we can all agree, if one card combos just got a little less powerful, we'd all be a little happier.